Today we're going to make a shepherd's pie with these pre-mixed spice blends, one for the meat and one for the potatoes. It's going to be deconstructed because it's going to be served with the meat directly under the potatoes rather than baked in the oven. You see we have 34 ounces of russet potatoes, which we're going to peel into the sink. Now, if you're making a semi-professional cooking video, what you want to do is have your sink completely full of dishes when you go to peel the potatoes. That way you can make an overly long potato peeling segment with your dirty sink in the background. So I'm using this simple metal potato peeler that's attached to a brush that came with my Rachel Ray cooking set. I don't like to wash the potatoes before I peel them because that way the exterior remains relatively dry and it doesn't slip in my hand while I peel it. I'll just peel one of these to show you the not expert technique, but sufficient technique that I use. I peel both potatoes, then you can take them over to your cutting board and get ready to cube them. Just need a rough cube of the potatoes so that they're in small enough pieces that they'll cook evenly. In this case, I'm going to use a pressure cooker to make my potatoes, something that I've never done before, but ends up working out really well. So yeah, take your time with this. There's no rush, and just cut them into relatively small pieces. Now, if you're making a cooking video, try to get your arm as much in the way of the food as possible, possibly almost knocking the tripod over with your elbow while you're doing this. It's good to be distracted while you're using a knife too. You might think that I somehow cut my hand open because of the bandage. You also want to have a bandage on your hand if you were making a cooking video and you want everything to look really appetizing. But actually, I just cut my hand open on some broken glass earlier in the day, so it's definitely not any problem with my knife technique, which, as you can see, sometimes, because my elbow's in the way most of the time, this is pretty good knife technique, decent. Once you have that all cubed, you can prepare the pressure cooker, if you have one, set to manual and the maximum pressure for 5 minutes. If you don't have a pressure cooker, you can use a Cylon from Battlestar Galactica, as you can see featured here. Now you take out a skillet, get it up to medium-high heat. On my stove, it's really needs to be at number 8 on the stove to be anywhere between like above medium and below extremely hot. I'm going to add a tablespoon of canola oil to the already hot pan. Now, if you're going to, at this point, add frozen peas and carrots, because I don't feel like using fresh anything, you want to make sure that you waste a bunch of time opening the bag while your video is live. Then dump the frozen vegetables directly in there, even though it's into screaming hot oil, because that way the frozen vegetables will potentially pop out and scald you. So just don't measure it or anything. Just dump it in there. Yeah. And if you avoid injury, you can try to even the layer out and let it start to cook in the oil. Now, once it's cooked in the oil for maybe 1 to 2 minutes, depending on how much oil and how hot, you can add, if you actually have any fresh produce involved in your recipe. In this case, I actually do have some fresh onion. You can add some pre-chopped fresh onion. You don't want to cook, in this case, because the peas and carrots were cold from the freezer. You don't want to add the onion at the same time. You want to get the cold stuff cooked a bit, then the onion can go in and cook for only a couple more minutes. Maybe a total of 3 to 5 minutes overall for that to get it to the right texture quality. Now, once it's been cooked long enough, you can add a little bit of garlic. You can add fresh garlic, or if you're lazy, you can use this pre-chopped up garlic that comes in a squeeze tube from God knows where. I'm going to make 16 ounces of ground lamb with this. There's no reason you can't use ground beef, but this has an interesting, a little bit more gamey quality to it that you might find appealing. So remove the vegetables and add the ground beef or ground lamb. So if you want to show people your technique for smashing down the meat and using a latex glove, try to get that as out of focus as possible so that they can't really see what's happening. It has a lot of mysterious... Oh, I messed up. I accidentally put it in focus for a second. Cook that on medium-high to high until one side's brown, a bit browned, maybe 3 to 4 minutes. You don't want to overcook it at this stage because when you go to smash up the ground meat, you want it to be cooked enough that it just doesn't mush down in the original raw quality. So one side getting brown enough is good. Then the other side brown for another minute or so, and then you can start to use, if you have you can just use the flat edge of a spatula, but I actually have this this meat grinding. What I use it for is smashing up meat device that my mother got me from Princess House, I think about 10 years ago. The quality of the grind or the quality of how you've smashed it up, you could do it in larger chunks, but I prefer really fine texture if possible. So I take my time and smash this up, and by the time you're done, if you spend that much time on it, it's probably pretty much browned. So at that point, we're going to add a teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce. We're going to add a cup and a half of chicken broth, and also the meat spices that I prepared earlier. You can use chicken broth off the shelf or a can of chicken broth. I used a broth cube, boiled it in a cup and a half of water, and then I'll add that after the spices. Once you have all of those things in there, we're also going to add a couple of spoonfuls, maybe approximating 3 or 4 tablespoons of tomato paste. That's going to add some texture to it. And as we cook down this liquid that we're adding, it's going to thicken up a bit and cook off somewhat, and it's going to infuse a lot of flavor into the meat on top of the flavor that you already have from using ground lamb. So, like I said, lamb or beef, both would be equally good. It just depends on if you're feeling adventurous. I think that you'd see lamb in a lot of the countries where people would actually make shepherd's pie. Now, once the potatoes are done, 5 minutes at maximum pressure, you can let off the steam Bennett or you can let it naturally relieve the pressure. If you're used to using a pressure cooker, you probably are impatient and don't feel like waiting for the pressure to go down naturally. I'm going to spoon these out and use a quick cut there to avoid showing you that I dropped some of the potatoes on the floor. Once you have the potatoes, I have 2.5 tablespoons of butter that I have sliced up, and I'm going to put a cup of fat-free milk. For creamier potatoes, obviously you could use half and half or whole milk, but I'm at least being semi-conscious with calories with this recipe. You want to put the butter directly into the potatoes while they're still hot. Then you can use a spoon, kind of stir it up a little bit to let the warmth of the potatoes melt the butter. You could also melt the butter in the microwave first, but this seemed a lot easier. Then once those are stirred up and the butter is mostly melted, you can add the cold milk. I wouldn't add the milk first because it negates the using the heat of the potatoes to melt the butter, and of course the potato spices. Now, if you have a mixer, you could certainly use that. A lot of people probably expect to use a mixer to make their potatoes, but that can get pretty messy. If you cook them properly, they're soft enough to just use a potato masher like this. So I think that the texture of these came out a lot better than the ones I made last time, and I think a lot of it has to do with mostly the milk probably, but the butter adds a lot of flavor as well. So the potatoes are done, and they'll actually start to cool quite a bit sitting on your counter. But after about 10 minutes, your meat should have, the sauce should have thickened, and it should have become infused with the sauce and the spices that you added before. Now you can add the vegetables back in. By keeping them set aside, although they're cooked and softened, they won't turn into complete mush boiling in your skillet for 10 minutes with the meat. So adding it back in, the meat portion is pretty much finished, and now you can plate the potatoes as a base, and then on top of that, you can serve the meat. We're not going to bother baking it in the oven like a proper shepherd's pie recipe, so this is just a much easier way to do it and retains the creaminess of the potatoes. I loved it. I hope you guys enjoy it.
What's for the daddy-o? There's a whiskey in the jar.